He lived his life obsessively thinking about his own demise, but really knew something was wrong when panic attacks started to affect his memory. This is Jody's story.
I started having what felt like mild panic attacks. Panic attacks that I would eventually learn were epileptic seizures, and I would need to have a huge chunk of my brain taken out. At the beginning of 2016, I started to have these strange sensations of something's about to go wrong that I just associated with panic attacks. And these attacks kept going on for about 6 months until I was at my grandma's 4th of July party when I felt something I had never felt before. Like, I'm gonna die right now. 20 minutes later, I black out. Next thing I knew, the EMTs were there and they were rushing me to the hospital to get a CAT scan. The doctors told me I have epilepsy. So immediately after the diagnosis, they put me on a couple of anti-epileptic drugs in the hopes that that would control the seizures. Unfortunately, the medication was not working for me. It was very debilitating. After 6 months, the doctors told me if I allowed these little seizures to continue, they would become bigger and bigger. They would spread to different parts of my brain. It would become harder and harder to control. And we think you need brain surgery. So they did a 2-stage surgery. The first surgery was to implant a set of probes deep into my brain to map out exactly where the seizure activity is coming from. I wake up and I'm like plugged into the matrix, so I've got cables coming out of my skull, and then my task for the next 7 days was to have a seizure. At about 5 days in, I had a seizure. They determined they would have to cut out the front half of my right temporal lobe, my right hippocampus, and my right amygdala. And they were like, all right, let's do some brain surgery. They took out 2 4-centimeter chunks of my brain, stitched me back together with staples. I wake up, I look at my neurosurgeon, and I'm like, I am okay, right? And he's like, yeah, you can see all this, yeah, you're okay. Everything went well.
Wow. Remarkable.
Big surgery.
Jody joins us along with his epileptologist from NYU Langone, Dr. Manisha Holmes. Welcome to the show, you two.
Hi, guys.
Hi, thanks for having us.
What an interesting story. So, Jody, your epileptic seizures were really starting to affect your memory and processing. Tell us how so.
Yeah, I mean, right after my first big seizure, my memory got a lot worse. I would forget what side of the street I lived on.
Wow.
And I mean, it's because the seizures were damaging the part of my brain that does that specific task of remembering where things are and when things are. And that was just getting worse and worse.
Dr. Holmes, Jody started seeing you after he discovered that he has epilepsy. And when you examined him, what did you find?
When Jody came to see me, Jody's very diligent about keeping track of his seizures, how often they're happening, what kind of seizures, which is really helpful in his treatment and management. So we had a good sense of, how often they were happening. And then unfortunately, by the time he had seen me, he had already tried multiple medications and was continuing to have seizures despite that. He also had an MRI that suggested that maybe there was a lesion there that was contributing to his seizures. So for me, surgery was really the next step that we wanted to consider, and he may be a good surgical candidate. So that was kind of the direction we took when we met.